The next big project is to build the galley. The galley is on the starboard side of the boat, for the most part, which is around the starboard side ballast tank. So when I build the galley, it's going to kind of enclose the ballast tank on that starboard side. So that means that I need to make sure first that the ballast tank is not going to leak. It would be a huge bummer to build the galley around the ballast tank, fill it up with water, and then figure out that it leaks. What I've been doing this week is fixing the access ports to the ballast tanks so that we can seal them up and, for one thing, make sure that see how much water they hold, see what the volume of each ballast tank is. I'm guessing it's about 300 gallons per side. And we're checking that there are no leaks. And so this week what I've been doing is building the access ports for the most part. It's kind of a complicated little device that is built into the tank, and it's been interesting, but I'm today fixing them to the ballast tanks and seeing if they leak, and I'm extremely nervous because we're adding 5,000 pounds of weight to the boat for the first, and second, it would be a huge bummer if there were leaks. So we'll see how it goes. My name is Matt. Follow along as I turn Duracell, the legendary ocean racing sailboat, into a comfortable cruising home.
Before we get into boat work this week, we want to thank Factor for sponsoring this episode. We got our very first box and we are quite excited to try out some of these meals. These pre-prepared chef-crafted meals are delivered right to your door with 35 options a week to choose from. Which one do you want, honey? There's chorizo chili, loaded bacon shredded chicken.
Ooh, broccoli grits.
These restaurant quality meals take 2 minutes microwaved or 7 minutes in the oven. With a very big boat project on our hands and a baby on the way, we are definitely looking for ways to enjoy tasty, healthy, high quality meals without all the time that goes into making them.
Oh, that's pretty good.
So head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code Duracell50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and free wellness shots for life. You get 2 free wellness shots from 3 available for every order while you're an active subscriber.
Here's a quick review of the ballast tank project before we seal them up and test the tanks. These were the old saltwater ballast tanks. There were 2 on each side plus 1 in the bow. One side of the boat held 3.4 metric tons of water, or about 900 gallons. They were filled by an intake on the leading edge of the keel when the boat was going fast. When the boat heels from the force of the wind on the sails, on most sailboats, the keel, which weighs 5 tons on Duracell, counteracts the heeling force to keep the boat upright. Duracell was designed to race in the Southern Ocean where conditions are much windier, so as Breeze built, a ballast tank could be filled to supplement the keel and to help keep the boat upright against the wind. Now we will not be using the boat in the same way. We will be cruising, not racing, looking for more favorable wind conditions. But we do need freshwater storage on board for drinking and cleaning, so we cut down the ballast tanks to about 1/3 their size, and we're going to use them for fresh, potable water. We will carry about 300 gallons per side and only fill them halfway. And if we need to use them as ballast, we will be able to move that water from one side to the other. This will give us room to build cabinetry and seating on the interior. The tanks were built with access holes in the top for cleaning and maintenance. The next step is to build access ports on them to seal the tanks. The port will be a neoprene gasket held down by a simple piece of G10 fiberglass bolted to the tank. The bolts will be potted into the tank top with thickened epoxy so there will be no nuts on the inside of the tanks. Now it's finally time to seal the tanks and test them for leaks. But some of us need to work. Okay, so this is where I'm starting from with my access project. So I have 16 accesses to do all over the boat, and there's going to be multiple steps per access. So this is going to take a while to get all these done. But I have to get these 4 or these 3 done, especially before I start building the galley, because I'm basically going to be enclosing them inside the galley. I will have access to them, but it will take some work to get to them. So anyway, I need to get them all done before I can start building the galley. So how this is going to work is I built this template. The template has the 10 holes around it, and it is what I used to find where I'm drilling the holes that will go around the access in the tank. So these holes are way over drilled. So I'm using 5/16 bolts, and these are 5/8 holes. My template, after I got the holes drilled, I installed these studs on them with nuts on both sides. All the studs have a ton of wax all over them so that they won't stick in the epoxy. And then I have they're threaded inserts. They're kind of like helicoils without the tabs on them. And the idea is that these helicoils are going to stay in the potted epoxy part. And that way, when the final bolt goes in them, it will be much more secure than if I just used epoxy as the threading. And so I'll take my jig with all of the helicoils on the studs. They'll all go into the holes. I'll fill all the holes with thickened epoxy that's going to be thickened with it's a 404, West Systems 404. It's a high density filler. Let it cure, and then we'll move on to the next step. I'll get to that later, but that's what I'm doing now. This is how I'm making the threaded holes that the bolts will go into with the threaded inserts in them. And what's really important to me is that the epoxy doesn't have any bubbles in it. So I'm using it's thickened but not very much epoxy. So why I'm doing that is so that any bubbles that are in the hole will pop up to the top, pop out. And so rise to the surface. And so I'm just going to use a syringe to inject the epoxy into the hole. And do it really slowly. So as to not get any air in there. I'm just going to kind of let that one settle down a bit and then move on to the next one and come back to it. Now I'm ready to build up the surface of the tank where the gasket will mate with the tank, will be between the tank and the hatch itself. And so what I'm going to do is put a bunch of epoxy around here and squish the tank lid down onto the epoxy so it makes a perfectly flat surface that the gasket can stick to or be mated to. So I've got this epoxy mixed up. It's just thickened, really thick with both the high density and some colloidal silica. And the tank lid is all waxed up and everything. So what I'm going to do is just get this epoxy on there, put the lid down, tighten it down. I've got these little itty bitty pieces of wood that are super glued between every other stud. And those make it so that I can tighten it down to those, but not any tighter. I want there to be, 1/8 of an inch of glue, of epoxy built up. And so those will keep me from squishing it all out. So this is the first one. This is still kind of an experiment, so we're going to see if it works, but I'm pretty confident that this is going to go well.
as usual, an embarrassing amount of glue.
Yep. So I've got this black, it's like weather stripping as kind of a dam here to hopefully keep too much epoxy from going into the tank. I've got the tank blocked off, but I'm trying to keep it more or less I'm trying to keep too much epoxy from going into the tank.
Tightening those nuts.
These nuts. Okay, so let this sit, come back tomorrow, and hopefully we'll have a nice pretty kind of flange area for the gasket to sit on. I hope this works. We're going to take it apart and see how it looks underneath this lid.
How will we know if it worked?
We won't know until we fill it up with water. Now, come on. Hey, look at that.
It worked?
It did. It worked pretty good. My weather gasket on the I was using as a dam to hold the epoxy from going into the hole didn't work at all. But that's okay. What I was hoping for and what happened is that the surface here is perfectly uniform and flat. And so you can see there's no like voids or anything in there. It looks really good. Cool.
Another successful experiment.
I think it is a successful experiment. Again, we won't know if it worked for sure until it's filled with water. The next trick is to be able to make one of these a day. This took, 2 days to make this. And so, yeah, I've got to figure out a way to make it in one day. And I think what we've got to do is just start using heaters and baking it every time we make one. So. I did the 4 ports on the starboard side, and it took about 4 days. By that time, I had figured out a much faster way to build them, and I was able to get all 4 of the ports on the port side done in 1 day. The big difference was I pre-filled the holes and the flange surface and stuck down the port with its bolts and inserts all ready to go and let the epoxy fill the area. I weighed them down and let it cure, and as you can see, they turned out really nice. I want the inside of these tanks to be very accessible. That's why I'm bolting these accesses instead of gluing them. But one access will be under the freezer, basically making it impossible to get to. So I'm gluing this one down with a glazing silicone that is food safe. After the freezer goes on, we won't see this access ever again, we hope. Today's the day we are going to put water in the tanks. I'm extremely nervous because we're adding 5,000 pounds of water to the boat to see if the tanks leak. My mom is here to give me a hand finishing up the details, and we'll see how it goes. The hatches on the starboard side are already installed, so we just have to install the hatches on the port side. My mom is cutting out the gaskets. I'm going to widen up the holes that are in the hatches a little bit more, and then we can install them, bolt them down, and then we're pretty much ready to go. This is the last step, just installing this gasket onto the access port. I've got the lip all cleaned up. I painted the inside of this lip last night with the potable water tank paint. So it's getting sealed up, ready to go.
On the boat when it's all finished, or are you gonna hide them somehow?
No, they'll all be hidden.
Under cushions and stuff?
Under cushions and behind cabinets. Yeah, you won't see any of them. Under freezers. My friends Barrett, Jill, and Leona dropped off some extra jack stands and heads for them so we could give the boat a little extra support under the tanks. One jack stand is under the bulkhead in the middle of the tank, and another one on the aft bulkhead of the tank. We are ready to add the water to the tanks. The hoses are run, and we've got a flow meter to count how many gallons are going into one of the tanks. Yeah, we're adding, it's theoretically 300 gallons per side, which 600 gallons is 5,000 pounds of water, 2.5 tons. It's a lot of weight.
So what's that for the rest of the world?
It's 2,300 liters, or 2,300 kilos. This is coming from the house, and so we're filling both tanks at the same time. This one's going to the starboard, this one's going to the port side. And we're just measuring how much water is going into one tank.
What is the worst that could happen?
I'm most nervous about the tanks leaking from where I fiberglass them together, like around the seams. Because that could be really hard to trace down where the leaks are coming from. That's what I'm like most nervous about. These hatches that I just put on, I am a little bit less nervous about because they, hopefully we could just, if they're leaking, we could just tighten them down, I hope, and then they'll stop leaking. But I'm also worried about the fact that we're adding so much weight to the boat. And, the boat's sitting on the ground. It's on jack stands. We've added extra jack stands underneath the tanks. And we're filling the tanks up on both sides at the same time. So it should be just fine, but
Should
it should be just fine.
And tell them what we're going to do.
Well, if we hear creaks and groans, we might make a run for it, but...
we might make a run for it? Oh, God.
But there's a lot of weight being added to the boat here, so it's just... we want to be very careful.
I'm prepared to put my body between Duracell and the ground. Are you?
Oh, yeah?
I'm not. I'm going to run aft.
This is tough, but there is a leak in both tanks. In the same place in both sides. So this is the center, this is kind of the, if you split the tanks in two, fore and aft, this is the wall that separates them. The water's coming out right here, and it started coming out once the water level had gotten up to, I don't know, up to about here in this tank. And I can only guess where it's coming from, but my guess is that there's probably a pinhole where this lid meets the flange. There's a whole bunch of glue to glue these lids on, and there's probably a pinhole, and the water traveled down along this seam, and then as soon as the water level got up high enough, it started pressing water out. Above the glass, there's like a tape here. But the hatches don't leak, but it doesn't really matter if there's other leaks. So I was hoping, if there were, anyway.
High five for the hatches not leaking.
Well, yeah,
Come on.
So we're going to fill the tanks up the rest of the way just to see how many gallons are in there and if we spring any more leaks. And then we'll start thinking about how to fix this.
All right, we'll see. All right.
We finished filling both tanks. As you can see, the boat did not collapse over top of the jack stands, which is great. And there were no more leaks, which was awesome. And they hold 265 gallons apiece. So a little bit less than I thought, but still within, the range. So the next thing to do is, I'm anxious to start building the galley, but these leaks need to be fixed. So that'll be priority number one. We'll get back to that tomorrow. And hopefully we'll have some good results for you next week. We have some more new Patreons to thank this week. First, thank you to Bernie, who is from Northwest Indiana, close to Lake Michigan. He is a farmer and a sport pilot and a weld inspector and hopefully someday a sailor. But thank you very much to Bernie.
Thank you to Wade, who grew up in Southern California but lives in Phoenix now. He grew up working on fishing boats and discovered sailing as a teen. And he's excited to get back into boating very soon and has a dream to do an ocean crossing. He's a wise man because he's planning on doing it on someone else's boat.
Exactly. Also, thank you to Jean and Grace, who are land yachters. They live in their RV and cruise the United States. And this summer they're going to Alaska, which we're very excited to hear how their trip goes up there. They have cruised on a sailboat around here, actually, in the San Juans, but this should be a great trip for them up in Alaska.
And tusen tack till Kalle. Kalle is in Sweden, and he grew up sailing and working on boats with his dad. And he has a family now. He's really looking forward to getting back into sailing and is searching for that boat. So good luck with your search, Kalle.
And lastly, thank you to Marge and Mike, who are lifelong Lake Superior sailors. But this summer, they are jumping on their Hallberg-Rossi, and they're going to cruise the Atlantic. They're going to do an Atlantic crossing. They sent along this great picture of their boat cat, their boat inspector, who's a force cat. So we wish you lots of luck, and we're looking forward to hearing how your trip goes. So thank you very much, Marge and Mike.
And thank you to all our patrons, of course. If you're thinking about becoming a patron, just know that you can become a patron for as little as $2 an episode, and there's no obligation for how long you support us. We have many patrons who just support us for a short period of time, and we appreciate all of it. As Matt says a million times, we could not do this project without you. So we'll see you next week.